Let me start off by saying thank you to the Women's Forum for inviting me today, and congratulations particularly to Janice and her team for organizing such an unusual event. I think they deserve a round of applause. I'm extremely delighted to be in the position to introduce Lord Mervyn Davies and Ambassador Barzan, both vocal advocates for diversity and inclusion. I think the topic of their conversation today, gender equity in a global context, is especially important and certainly one that is very close to my heart. Most people know me as the chairman of Bloomberg, but another role that's come up a number of times today that I'm equally proud to hold is that of the founding chairman of the U.S. 30% Club. The 30% Club, as both Ambassador Barzan and Lord Davies are aware, is a group of chairs, chief executive officers, and other business leaders committed to better gender balance on boards. And rather like Downton Abbey, it also happens to be a great British export. I thought that would get a little bit better response. Thank you. Thank you. We rehearsed that many times, and one of my colleagues wanted to take it out, and I said, no, not with this group. They're going to get it immediately. The 30% Club has come up a number of times today, but let me just summarize quickly. It was founded in the UK by Helena Morrissey, the Chief Executive Officer of Newton Asset Management, at the same time as Mervyn and his team published his hugely influential Women on Boards report in 2010. Our U.S. chapter was launched last year with 25 chief executive officers and chairmen, and since then, I'm delighted to report that we now have over 50 members, including Warren Buffett, Sheryl Sandberg, Larry Fink, and Mike Corbat from Citi. Thank you. And we keep forging ahead. In this, we derive much inspiration and optimism from the impact that both the UK arm of the 30% Club and the Davies Review have had on the corporate landscape in the United Kingdom since 2011. Women's representation on FTSE 100 boards has more than doubled to just under 27% in less than 5 years, a really important lesson for what we're talking about. And where in 2011 we saw 21 all-male boards, today there isn't a single one left in the FTSE 100. It really is an incredible achievement and the kind of success we both aspire to, but we know is in reach in the United States. More than these impressive numbers, I think the real success over the past 5 years has been to shift the view of gender parity out of the realm of social responsibility and into a more central conversation about business success. And we heard this throughout the panels earlier this morning. It's now clearer than ever that companies that both encourage, practice, and execute successfully a diversity strategy and are inclusive in their culture enjoy much better business results. As a data company, Bloomberg cannot ignore what the numbers tell us. It has become increasingly clear to me, as I know it has to my fellow CEOs and chairs, that diversity and inclusion isn't just about doing the right thing for our employees, it's about doing the right thing for our companies. Today, the war for the best people in the world is greater than ever, and we have to access the full pool of talent. Diversity is a true and clear business imperative as much as it is an ethical imperative. With that, I'll end by thanking you all once again for the opportunity for me to be here today, and by turning the conversation over to our speakers, Ambassador Matthew Barzan, Lord Mervyn Davies, and their moderator, Susanna Schroebsdorf. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the incredible introduction that I think sets the stage for this conversation. I'm thrilled to be here, and particularly to talk about the global mission to increase the number of women on boards and to increase it faster, which I think is the second question. I think we are slowly increasing, but how fast, we don't know. I've been given permission to call you Mervyn,
yeah,
which means I get to call you Matthew. So we have Mervyn and Matthew. I think we should begin perhaps with the Davies report, because it's groundbreaking. You released it just a few months ago, and as Peter said, you showed remarkable change, almost more than doubling the number of women on the boards in the FTSE 100, and now there are no FTSE 100 companies without a woman on the board. This is a challenge. I mean, it's in Britain, but I think one of the things we're seeing across Europe is that there is such a spread of such a wide gap in the diversity. You go down to Southern Europe and maybe it's 6% on the boards, and you go to Norway and it's 40%. And they've achieved these with variety of measures, from quotas to lip service to what you're doing, which is taking a public platform. So maybe tell us how your report came about. How did you decide what the criteria were to make it happen?
Well, I think first of all we should step back, and I can just see the audience. How many people in the room have got a daughter? That's a lot. You know, it's a much easier conversation with a man or a woman about this issue when they have daughters. What sort of world do you want your kids to live in? You don't want a rich-poor divide. You realize that people are going to live longer. You realize that we've got to make sure in all the crises around the world that people are looked after. So 4 or 5 years ago, when we started on this journey, it was extraordinary to think that the UK economy, top 21 companies, had never had a woman on their board in their history or their executive committee, and today it's 0. So we've made great progress, but I think this is no longer about women on boards. This is widened into an issue around social change on the role of women, not just in business, but in society. And I would say, and by the way, if I'm not American, I'm Welsh, small country in the UK. Know Matthew very, very well. I come here regularly, but the whole point of going on a stage like this, I might as well be punchy and controversial. I want to be invited again. What I've listened to this morning is extraordinary talent, unbelievable people I've met in the space of a few hours and over dinner last night. Literally, genuinely hundreds of people who should be on boards, but they aren't. If you carry on in the US, churning your board members as you are today, and don't have a fundamental change in the way that you are running boards of directors, you are never going to get to the ratios that we're going to get in the UK and in other countries. So I'm sorry. I think you're asleep at the wheel. This is the most important economy in the world. This is the role model for the rest of the world. And we'll widen the discussion later, but my plea is you've got to go bigger, set a clearer vision, execute it well, get some men involved in it, and you've got to get on with it, because I think you're going to fall behind the rest of the world.
So and I'd love to hear Matthew on this too, what is holding us back here in the United States? Speaking from your perspective,
Well, I think in the UK there was no doubt that it was helpful that a member of the club, one of the men, was willing. It is possible for men to multitask, by the way. I've, those that know me well, Glenn and others, I've done about 350 speaking engagements on this. I've spoken more about women in the last few years than certainly than my wife would like. But I genuinely believe the talent is there. A chairman had to be involved in it. We then put a team together with very clear sort of accountabilities. Everybody knew what was expected of them. I think the institutional shareholders play a bigger role. So in the US, I think you've got to put more pressure on the companies. The headhunters, you've got to form a charter amongst yourselves saying that you're going to fix the problem. And the chairmen have got to come together, and here you have a slightly different model, chairman and CEOs, and say, we are not going to sit on the sideline, 30, 40, 50 of them got to come together and fix it.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because your public platform, I think, helped you a lot. So you had the blessing of the government. Glenn Moreno said earlier, you have to quantify it to change it, and that gives you the permission or the platform to name and shame. Is that too strong a phrase?
No, I'd hate to be accused of having leaked one or two names to the press, and I mean, no, but we had to name and shame some of the corporations that were really not getting it. But it did require lots of one-on-one conversations with the chair of nominations and with the CEOs and the chairman. But as I said earlier, the nature of the debate now has moved into what are we going to do about the executive pipeline? What are we going to do to change the face of corporate Britain? So I genuinely believe that success has many fathers, failure none. And in this, what we did, we got everybody involved and everybody together.
What's interesting is that you've achieved a number that is close to what Sweden has achieved without quotas. And maybe, Matthew, because before you were the ambassador to the UK and Northern Ireland, you were an ambassador to Sweden. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how cultures differ and how we figure out this problem when you're dealing with so many different cultures.
Sure. I have to do a quick bit of business first. I have to take a picture for my 14-year-old daughter. If I don't take a picture of it, it never really happened. And this is, who have children that age. So I'm going to take a picture because what we heard earlier is this group isn't going to always be getting together, right? So I hope again at least one more time, but this is history. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take a quick picture here. Oh, shameless Welsh. Okay, smile, guys.
Yeah, we can bring up the lights.
All right, thank you. And by the way, just on sound, can you guys in the back, do we sound okay? I mean, not the content, but the volume? It's okay? Okay. If it's not, just start waving. We're Americans, or most of us are Americans. We don't have to be subtle. But I am trying to learn. I learned a little bit of Welsh, which I won't torture you with. But words, you asked about Sweden, and you asked about this device, which in the UK they call a mobile telephone. Right? Think about that phrase. Mobile telephone, when most of us were growing up, was an oxymoron. Right? Telephones were on every street corner. They were chained to your wall or chained to your desk. They were anything but mobile. Our children will never know a telephone that isn't mobile, right? And yet we are on this journey. We've all been through these last 15, 20 years of this journey from oxymoron, maybe like institutional freshness, that one day too might be a redundant phrase. And you think about the topic that brings us here together. And in answer to what I learned from Sweden, I would go, I'd usually start when I get together with a group, and I'd put up on the big screen like that a picture of a Swedish woman. And I think she was around 65 years old at the time. And I'd ask the group, do you know who this is? And no one ever did. And I'd say, she's one of the most amazing engineers you've ever produced as a country. And that got them sitting up, because they're very proud of their engineering. These folks invented the seatbelt, Skype, Spotify. Right? They're very clever and appropriately proud of it. And I said, you've used, and it's true of you, you've used her invention at least once today, if not more. And her name is Laila Olgren, and I would tell them that, and it still hadn't clicked. And she was the only female engineer, and she was also one of the youngest engineers on the team back in the 1970s with Finland, trying to figure out how to do mobile telephones. And they'd figured almost everything out, the clunky big thing in your car, and they had this Saab going up and down the interstate. And they'd have cell towers. They'd figured that out too. But the one thing they couldn't figure out was you'd make connection with the first cell tower, like here, and by the time you got to this second cell tower, when you hit the 7th digit, you would have lost touch with the first one and not connected to the second one. So all these smart engineers are trying to figure this out. And I was not there. It's 1978. But Lila sort of raises her hand in the back, and she says, what if you dial the number and then hit send? And everyone sort of looked, you mean no dial tone? And she said, yeah, no dial tone. And of course, Her invention is called green button dialing. It is on all 5 billion cell phones on the planet today. And it took this leap that she had, first of all, that she was in that room and that she was listened to, but that where in this thing that brings us together today, where can we skip a step? Where are we assuming in this supply-demand, that way of looking at it, that we think we have to have a dial tone? Turns out you didn't. That big clunky cell phone was plenty smart enough to store 7 digits so you could just hit send. So I reflect on that as I think about what we as a country and what the UK and what we could do together.
So you're talking a little bit about who's in the room, and I think that's a fundamental question before you ever get to a board, before you even get to the C-suite, is how to get more women in the room. And what I would wonder from both of you, having been executives at financial technology companies where there is an even bigger gap in some cases than in other industries, how do we get more women in the room? And I think there was a Harvard Business School review recently, an article recently, a survey saying that women lose ambition about 5 years in. They come into companies more ambitious than men. 5 years later, they're less ambitious than their cohorts. What is it that we can do? Is it part of the, you need to see it to be it, or maybe?
I mean, with all due respect to the Harvard Business Review, I would say we're in a world where in the old days, young people looked up to older people for wisdom about the world, about business and whatever. The whole nature of the discussion has changed. Older people now have to look down to younger people to really connect with them on the speed of IT development and what's happening in the world. So, and it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, you know, if you sit on a board of directors today and you're not awake to the fact that your business model, your life cycle of the company and your product life cycle is shortening, then you're not going to be around long. So I think that one of the challenges for a board of directors is how do you get to staff committees, how do you get the young talent in that really understands what's happening in the IT world? How do you have an international board? But it's inconceivable that that group is all men. Mm-hmm. So I think that in the UK, we now realize that we were in a bad place. There's not, there's not a chairman or a CEO who doesn't realize that the train has left the station, you've got to be on it, and a 33%, which is our new target, will make it in a couple of years. I honestly believe now it's about populating the executive committees, but it's also about celebrating role modeling. So I think we're on a roll in the UK. I think in the US, we want you to set, given the responsibility you have as the most important economy and so much innovation going on here, set your targets much higher. Yeah. So I'm worried, having listened to this morning, that actually you're going to be a couple of pips higher in 3 or 4 years. I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Matthew.
I can't let that stand. Yeah. So I think our approach to it in America, and we have many more experts on it than I am, but I would just say, I hope you're wrong. I think you're wrong. I think those earlier panels left me with a feeling of excitement. People get it. They're going to go do something. I'm mindful that at this point, as the 4th or 5th panel in a conference, this is the point where everything has been said, just not everyone has had a chance to say it yet. Right. So I was loving what I heard. I think there's deep commitment and passion and resolve to go do something about it. With a slight ribbing to our friends in the UK, I mean, come on, we won the Women's World Cup way more than once from a game you guys invented. And I am really proud of that, and that is an inspiration. Now, that didn't happen by accident. There was a lot of things up through the entire system, from youth through how we handle it at our universities. And I think if we go back to sports, we can learn a lot, or sport, as you would say. And maybe one final thought in the spirit of being provocative. Obviously, we know that actions matter, and we heard that. I think words matter, too. I think they matter a lot. And there's one word that came up a lot on these previous panels that I think we should be careful of overusing. And there was a great guy who, you know how every year they put out the rankings of the top schools, I mean, most educated countries in the world, best education. So it would be great if our 2 countries were 1 and 2, or maybe 2 and 1, but we're not. So it's always Finland, and then Singapore occasionally wins, but those guys battle it out for 1st and 2nd. So the head of the Finnish public education system is always invited to New York City probably by many of you, about what can we learn about how you do it in Finland. And usually first or second question he gets from the audience is some flavor of, and what do we do about teacher accountability? And it usually is with a wagging finger. And he sort of turns to his colleague who's Finnish American, and they speak English just as well as we do. But he said, we don't have a word for accountable, or we don't have a word for accountability in Finnish. But he talked to his friend, he goes, oh, I know what you mean. Accountability is that thing you have left after you've removed responsibility. And that, I think, is really powerful. And you heard on the previous panel the word responsibility. That is a full concept where you bring your whole self to it. Accountability is a thin, it's part of it. It's kind of thin, it's kind of mean, it's kind of nasty, it's kind of like, how can I fire you? It's kind of finger pointy. And I just think we need more responsibility and less accountability. It's a fuller concept, and that's what's going to get us to go further, faster.
I mean, I think that the reason I'm against quotas, there's no doubt in the UK the threat of quotas was an incredibly useful tool that I used to reel out, as did Helena, as did everybody else, to the chairman. But quota self-regulation, putting the whole system back into a good place, but doing it without quotas, what it has led to is that more than 50% of the women that have been appointed to boards had never sat on boards before. So the gene pool that we've tapped into, as I mentioned earlier, academia, health sector, service sector, individuals, I remember I've mentored a lady, I always quote it, called Jasmine Whitbread, running Save the Children. I took her to see a major PLC. I said, Jasmine, CEO of Save the Children, would love to be a non-exec. And the chairman said, but she doesn't really run a P&L. I said, well, it's Save the Children. It's like thousands of people. It's a huge organization. Yeah, but it's not like a real company. What? So I think we have to smash down, and we have done. Jasmine now is on a range of boards. So I think as we bring more women into the corporate sector, we really do have to think about where they're coming from. And my final comment on that is, if you run a major company today, you've got the business model challenge, the impact of social media, et cetera, but you've also got a new generation which is looking at work. It may be different in some of your companies, but everything I'm involved in, they have a different attitude to work-life balance. They have a different attitude to how long they're going to work for the company. And so employers really have to get a grasp of this, because otherwise a lot of people will not stay in the corporation. And the first to leave, evidence would show, are the women.
How do you do that? Why is that different or easier or better to do in the UK versus the United States? What are the challenges we have here that you weren't seeing? And I think maybe...
I think it's the world over. I don't know if you agree, Matthew. I don't think it's any different in Asia. People, because they're going to live longer, they're going to have probably 2 or 3 careers. The pension issues are building in many nations. People are traveling more. I think it's becoming, because of the transparency issue, because of social media, it's becoming more difficult to run a country. It's certainly becoming more difficult to run a business. So I think that we're going to have to connect with people in our businesses in a slightly different way. And one of the things they're asking for on a graduate entry, you ask any CEO, certainly in Europe, the first thing they used to go to pay, but now they look at what's the equality like, what's the CSR policy, what sort of feel and culture does this company have?
I mean, I would agree. I've had the great privilege in your great country of going to over 110 high schools, and I meet with high school seniors. And there's over 10,000 of them. And I don't give a lecture because I don't want to hear a lecture from an American. Or maybe they do, but I don't want to give one. And so I asked them to write a picture for me of something that frustrates or concerns them about my country, and then to write a picture of something that inspires them. And what you hear about is, and that's where I hear about Women's World Cup, I hear about these things of being inspired. And the one we make a big word cloud, the one biggest positive that these 10,000 kids write is opportunity.
Yeah.
That's what they want.
Yeah.
And that's what I think our country at its best does provide. I mean, it's been a rocky history, but we keep expanding the circle of who we include into our democracy, into our companies, and we got to keep doing that.
Does that mean elevating non-C-suite women into the boards? People who have had no C-suite experience? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness. I mean,
We do it with men. Why?
Well, again,
I mean,
I'm sounding very pro-America here, which is a good thing. I mean, one of the things I hear when I'm back in my job is in higher education, you know, struggling with diversity there in your country. And one of the things about how we do it differently that I think could inspire this work is that as a general rule, when we look at candidates, we sort of say, hey, by the end of this time, you'll be in good enough shape and we're proud to give you a diploma with it. The perception I get from your great country is it's a little bit more like, can you make it here?
Yeah.
And so there's lots of sort of finger pointing downstream or upstream, depending on how you think about it, of like, well, we're not getting enough diverse students with the right qualifications so that we can let them in. And I think our attitude of like, well, maybe not, same here, but like, we'll take you, we'll invest in you, and we'll make it work. Certainly companies are all about investing in people. They ought to do that.
Mervyn has a...
And getting all caught up.
We're here to talk about boards, but let's move on. I just want to follow up on that. In the UK, we've introduced this thing called Speaker for Schools, which was introduced by a journalist, where people go, about 100 of us go around schools talking to final year students. It's only when you connect with that. I did one last Friday in Bristol, about 180 kids, just extraordinary mix of backgrounds. And what was incredible in this day and age is out of 182, only 2 read newspapers. Everybody obviously on Facebook, everybody using Spotify, Their means of communicating with each other, we state in the obvious, are profoundly different. Their way that they look at the world is profoundly different. But I tell you, they are, and this is maybe, I've done now half a dozen in the last 6 months, their attitude to equality in the workplace and what they demand in the next few years, I think young people are going to be absolutely tougher with boards of directors and companies and say, why is this stuff not right in our company? So I think they're going to take a much harder line, and I think if businesses don't get their house in order in the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to pay the penalty.
So what you're saying is that, in conclusion, is that a board without women is going to look like a landline.
Well, I don't
5
think
years.
I don't think graduates will want to work in the law if 6 out of 10 grads that join law are female and 11% of the partners are female. Why would they stay? Why should they stay? In the same way, if 51% of the working population in, say, the UK is female, and you've still only got 20-odd% of female representation at the board, it's not a fair society. We are the generation and the people in this room that need to fix it.
That's a beautiful way to end it. Thank you so much, Lord Davies. Ambassador Barzin.
Thank you.